Hey guys, Chris Americos here with another video for you. Today we're talking about verbs of the senses. How many senses do we have? So you probably know we have 5 different senses. When I say sense, I'm talking about natural senses that allow us to understand the world around us. Although some people might argue that intuition is a 6th sense that some people might have, I'm going to tell you right now that there's 5. When we talk about verbs of the senses in English, there are several different concepts that we're going to use to explain how some things are different from other things. 3 of these important concepts are the difference between action verbs and non-action verbs, the difference between action verbs and linking verbs, and the difference between general ability verbs and focused ability verbs. Let's start with the first sense. So the first sense is the sense that we use with our eyes. We call it the visual sense, or you might call it the sense of sight or the sense of vision. With this sense, we're going to talk about 3 different verbs: to see, to look at, and to watch. But let's not forget about the verb to look. But Chris, you already said to look at. Isn't that the same? No, it's not the same. It's not the same. There are some things called action verbs. There are other things called non-action verbs. But there are also linking verbs. One of the verbs to look is an action verb, and the other verb to look is a linking verb. You'll see what I mean when I give you some examples. Now, some people might be asking, what's the difference between to see, to look at, and to watch? Well, to see is a general ability verb. This means that it describes what I can do and what I can't do, and it doesn't describe when I focus this ability. So, for example, right now I see you, but I also see the door. I'm not focusing my eyes on the door. I'm not focusing my ability on the door. That's why I can't say that I'm looking at the door. But now, I'm looking at the door. Each of the 5 senses has special verbs in English that can be separated into general ability verbs or focused ability verbs. So with the visual sense, the verb to see is a general ability verb, whereas the verbs to look at and to watch are focused ability verbs. So what's the difference between look at and watch? Well, we can use the verb to look at when we focus our ability of vision on something that is static or isn't moving. We look at pictures, we look at photos, we look at a lot of things. But if we want to focus our ability on something that's moving, we use to watch. We watch films, we watch plays at the theater, we watch movies. By the way, you might not have known that the word movie means moving pictures. That's why we look at pictures but watch movies. And then at the end of this list, we have the verb to look again. The verb to look again. Not look again, but the verb look for the 2nd time in this list. And this time, it's a linking verb. So what's the difference between to look as an action verb and to look as a linking verb? To look at, which is an action verb, describes when the subject transfers an action to an object. I'm looking at the door. But when we use a linking verb, like to look, we describe the subject. The door looks great. In this example, great describes something about the door, the subject. No action is transferred from the subject to an object, and the predicate adjective great gives us more information about the subject, the door. Now let's back up a second. We had 3 verbs before this that we talked about: see, look at, and watch. Of these 3 verbs, see is a non-action verb, while look at and watch are action verbs. What does that mean? That means that look at and watch can be used in present continuous, future continuous, past continuous, and any other continuous form that we can think of in English. Remember, continuous is the same as progressive. So action verbs can be used with these continuous verbs. They describe an action, whereas the verb to see describes our general ability, and it cannot be used in a continuous form. Okay, I lied. It can be used in a continuous form, but that changes the meaning. When we talk about using our eyes, I see everything. We cannot say, I'm seeing everything. If we use to see in the continuous form, it changes the meaning of the verb. If someone says, I'm seeing Sarah, this means that this person and Sarah are boyfriend and girlfriend. They're dating. If we talk about our senses and the sense of vision, then see should not be used with continuous tenses. It's not an action verb. Okay, now we can fast forward to where we were. The verb to look as a linking verb. There are some rules that we need to remember when we use the verb to look as a linking verb. And to remember these rules, it's a little bit easier to remember which phrases are used for which purposes. So, let's make a short list. There's to look like, to look as if, and to look as though. You've probably heard some of these phrases before, and something different follows each of them. Let's take a look. The verb look by itself, without any other words, is used before an adjective or an age. We can use look like with a noun or a phrase. We can use look as if with a phrase, and we can use look as though with a phrase. So here are some examples. He looks about 70. He looks like my grandfather. He looks like he's been alive for a long time. He looks as if he has lived for thousands of years. He looks as though he's going to hit me for all of my rude comments. Each of the 5 senses in English has a linking verb which can be broken down into these 4 phrases. For the visual sense, it's look like, look as if, look as though. For every other sense, there will be one verb that can be broken down into these different phrases. And they follow the same rules. In case you were wondering, linking verbs are not action verbs. They cannot be used in continuous. The next sense that we should talk about is the auditory sense, or the sense of sound, or some people say the sense of hearing. Here we have 2 verbs, one about general ability, to hear, and one about focused ability, to listen to. Listen to is an action verb, and hear is not an action verb. If we use hear as an action verb, and we use hear with the continuous form, that will mean something completely different. We're talking about hear, like the general ability we have when we use our ears. If I tell you, I'm hearing voices, this means that I'm probably a little cuckoo. Instead, we should say, I hear voices, not I'm hearing voices. When we want to talk about focused ability, we say listen to. I'm listening to music. When we say that we're using a focused ability, this also tells us we want to understand something about the object. So if I say, I hear music, this means that there's some music, maybe in the next room or next apartment, and it's playing very loudly. I understand that music is there. This is my general ability. But if I say I'm listening to music, this means that I want to understand the words. I want to understand something. I'm trying to listen to the music. I'm focusing my ability. As with every other verb of the senses, the sense of hearing also has a linking verb. This linking verb is to sound. And don't forget that we have several phrases we can use with it. To sound like, to sound as if, to sound as though. And they all have a special rule. Just sound plus an adjective. Sound like plus a noun or a phrase. Sound as if plus a phrase. Sound as though plus a phrase. For the next 3 senses, I'm not going to repeat that part because it's exactly the same. So for example, I hear music in the other room. It sounds like rock music. It sounds like Jimi Hendrix. It sounds cool. Let's move to the next sense. The next sense we're going to talk about is the tactile sense, or the sense of touch. Now here we have 2 verbs again, one about general ability and one about focused ability. Our verb about general ability is touch. Just touch. When we use the verb to touch, we're describing general contact with something. Physical contact. We're not trying to understand something about this object, we're just making contact. He touched me. Here, touch my shirt. But when we use the verb to feel, which is the second verb about this sense, we're trying to understand something. We're focusing our ability. Oh, wow. It's really soft. And what about the linking verb for this sense? Well, the linking verb is the same. That's really confusing. Sorry. Yes, the linking verb is to feel, but it's not an action verb. For example, my shirt feels soft. Oh, wow. It feels like glass. Now, when we talk about the tactile sense, we don't want to mistake the verb to feel about physical contact with the verb to feel about emotions. These are two different things. The word looks the same, but they have different meanings. We're only talking about physical contact. If you're watching this video and English is not your first language and you're trying to learn English, remember that the verb to feel might have several different translations in your language. Some of them are probably right and some of them are probably really wrong. So be careful when you use the verb to feel because it's always about physical contact. Moving forward, the next sense we need to talk about is the olfactory sense. What did you just say? That's what it's called, sorry. Yeah, nobody really uses that word, but it's the sense of smell. And this video is going to be really confusing for those of you who already speak English, because you're going to think, Chris, have you completely lost your mind? Maybe I have. But when we talk about the sense of smell, there are three verbs. To smell, and to smell. Yeah, I really said that. So before I talk any more about the sense of smell, I need a drink. Okay. Where was I? That's right. There's to smell, and to smell. It's not a joke. One of them is a non-action verb, one of them is an action verb, and one of them is a linking verb. Let me tell you what I'm talking about. The first verb, to smell, is a non-action verb, and it describes our general ability. So let's say you're walking down the street, walking down the street, and you say, I smell gas, or I smell petrol if you're British. This is a non-action verb. You cannot say, I'm smelling petrol. No, that's wrong. I smell gas. It describes your general ability. When we focus this ability, we can use it in the continuous form because it's an action verb. I'm smelling flowers. So you can see that these two concepts are really different things. If we talk about the verb to smell as a linking verb, then we can say, these flowers smell great. They smell like roses. The fifth and final sense that we need to talk about is the gustatory sense. There you go again, Chris, with all those big words. Hey, that's what it's called. But most people say the sense of taste. And the sense of taste is really similar to the sense of smell because the three verbs we talk about with the sense of taste are to taste, and to taste. And you guessed it, one is a non-action verb, one is an action verb, and one is a linking verb. As a non-action verb, we describe our general ability. So for example, you're eating soup. I taste pepper. You didn't try to taste pepper, pepper just happened and your senses picked up on it. It cannot be used as an action verb. It cannot be used in continuous. So, I taste pepper, but not I'm tasting pepper. That would be wrong. You can say I'm tasting if you're talking about the verb to taste as an action verb, which has a little bit of a different meaning. For example, you go to an event where you try different types of wine. You can say, I'm tasting wine. And then we have to taste as a linking verb. We could say, that wine tastes great. That wine tastes like Cabernet. That wine tastes earthy. So as you can see, the verbs of the senses in English have a lot in common. There's always a verb to describe our general ability and a verb to describe our focused ability. Some of the verbs are non-action verbs, which means they cannot be used in continuous, and some of our verbs are action verbs, which means they can be used in continuous. And every sense has a linking verb, which gives us more information about the subject. And the verbs of the senses are really cool because they let us describe things that we don't know the names for, or maybe things that can't be translated, or don't have a special English word. Let's take the example that you're meeting someone at the airport who you don't know. Probably if you want to find him, your first question should be one of the next two questions. What does he look like? Or, how does he look? Both of these questions are completely fine, and both of them are correct. Just when we use the question word what, which is usually about a noun, we need to say look like. Remember that after look like, we use a noun or phrase. The same goes for sound like, feel like, smell like, and taste like. They're all the same. If we use the question word how, which is usually about adjectives, we don't say look like, we just say look, because of the rule that we described earlier. After look, we use an adjective. The same goes for sound, feel, smell, and taste. I hope this video gave you a little more information about verbs of the senses in English. We'll talk more about some of the topics discussed in this video in later videos. If you have any questions, make sure to write them in the comments below. Press like, subscribe to my channel, and tell your friends to do the same. Until next time, it's Chris Americos.